Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky. Good evening, this is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Chelsea King was a popular high school senior, an outstanding achiever determined to make a difference. 14-year-old Amber Dubois loved books and poured her heart into the animals she cared for. Treasured by their families and friends, both girls disappeared in San Diego County, just 8 miles and 1 year apart. The community's desperate search led authorities to John Albert Gardner III, a brutal predator hiding in plain sight. Now Pulitzer-nominated author Caitlin Rother delivers an incisive, heartbreaking true crime thriller that touches our deepest fears. The book that we are featuring this evening is Lost Girls by my special guest, journalist and author, Caitlin Rother. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Caitlin Rother.
Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you very much for coming back on. This is a very, very interesting case, and again, like very much a true crime, very heartbreaking, but still a fascinating story for those listening. Now, you start off your book and you dedicate a fair amount of your book, and I understand why, and true crime fans will as well. The subject of this book is John Gardner. Take us way back. Take us back to the very beginning, his formative years, his parents. Describe his early life. Take us back, please.
Well, I think his history actually starts before he's even born. In my mind, his mother was very a big part of this story because I believe that they had such a complicated and codependent relationship that the fact that she grew up in a very dysfunctional family and became the matriarch of this whole family really kind of set a foundation for him to be, coming into this world and also then growing up in this very dysfunctional family, which extended far past his mother but also into his father's side as well. And basically what we have here is a whole world of molestation and rape and mental illness and addiction, geographical and financial instability, it just abuse, and it just was not a great family to be born into. And when John Gardner was born, he had problems in the womb even before he came into this world. So, it was clear that, looking back, there was something wrong. He was born, he was colicky, he had all kinds of problems. He was immediately a hyperactive child and, went to nursery school and ended up biting a little girl, and they wanted him to be drugged. His mom didn't want to drug him because he was only 3. And she, had to end up drugging him with Ritalin because he was diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it just got worse from there. So his father was also, physically abusive to him. As when he was 10 months old, he beat him, while the mom was at the store, came home, found her baby, covered in bruises, and she stormed out, and it just was not good. His father was a drunk, and he ended up using drugs, and the mother ended up leaving him. But it was, he didn't like John Gardner was not happy with going through the divorce. He had a lot of problems. He was very troubled. He had a problem with self-hate, even at age 6. He was talking about how much he hated himself, parents were going through divorce. He was threatening to commit suicide and jump off an apartment building at age 9. So, I mean, it was clear from the very beginning that this guy was really, really troubled, and his mother really, I felt, did a lot of whatever she could. She was a psychiatric nurse, and she tried to get him medicated. She, took him to get hospitalized 3 times at ages 9 and 10, and she tried to do the best she could do, but, there's only so much you can do when you have a kid like that. So anyway, he grew up, he developed bipolar disorder as a teenager. He tried, a multitude of medications, and soon he got too big, to force him to take the medication, and he didn't like taking them, as many people with bipolar disorder, don't.
Right.
But he also had pretty serious side effects, so, he actually had to be hospitalized from some of these side effects. It wasn't a small thing that he didn't want to take them, like many bipolar patients say, I don't want to lose the high. It wasn't really that. It was really more serious. But he just didn't want to take them anymore. And it just got worse from there. I could talk for another hour just on that. So,
what were his side effects from the medication?
He ended up having just, I think he had some liver problems, and when, even recently when he tried to take some medication right before he killed Chelsea, he was getting manic episodes and pacing around, and he wasn't able to sleep. And, sometimes when you have a mixture of disorders the way that he did, you take different things and you're going to have an odd reaction to them, where something may work for one person. If you have, you're bipolar and you're hyperactive, I'm guessing that you're going to have a mix of reactions, that maybe someone who only has one of those problems might not have. So I think it was probably also tricky to give him the right medication. And ironically, when I went to go visit him in prison, he told me he finally was on a medication that worked for him, and he finally feels, okay again. So that's really sad.
Yeah, a bit too late.
Right.
Yeah. So you're talking about his mother, a psychiatric nurse, and really in denial, probably still to this day, according to your book. But
denial
tell
about
us
what?
more about, pardon me?
Denial about what?
Well, just denial about his guilt or what he was capable of, or that he might need medication. I mean, explain a little bit more about how she enabled, and a little bit more about what you thought she sort of was in denial
I want to
about.
be careful about terms like denial and enabling, because that would imply that that's my opinion. So I actually have really tried not to express an opinion about what I think about his mom. I know there's some people I quote in the book who feel that she was an enabler and in denial, and I just want to be careful to just state out at the front that this is not my opinion. I'm not going to talk about what my opinion is in terms of that, because this is such an inflammatory subject. In this particular case, I just kind of want the book to speak for itself. But what I feel is that she did a lot of whatever she could do, and there are many people who blamed her for this whole thing, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to write the book, was to really get in there and see what did she do, what could she have done, what did she know, what didn't she know. She claims she didn't think he was capable of it, so I'm not sure, to be honest, whether you can say she was in denial completely, although, because he told her, for example, he didn't molest this 13-year-old girl in 2000 when he went to prison the first time, and most of the family believed him. So it wasn't just her, it was the whole family, you could say, was in denial, because they believed him and they saw a whole other side to him, that he was this nurturing and protective guy, and yes, he was troubled, but they didn't think he was capable of it, and they had to find out that there was DNA on these panties that were Chelsea's before they finally were able to accept that this is who he was. And I think that that's because his mother was raped and molested, and she was a victim too, and she couldn't bring herself to see her son as doing the same things that were done to her. And so, yes, I mean, I guess you can call that denial. I'm just saying I just want to be careful with the terminology.
Right. No, I know what you're saying. Enabling is also, like, I'm glad you made that clarification, because I don't want in any way to say that, cause and effect, what she did or didn't do.
Right.
No,
and there
I
are
never.
people
I never
who believe she is an enabler. There is no doubt about that, including some of the homicide detectives I interviewed. So.
Wow. Well, geez. Okay. So now in 2000, of course, you just mentioned that he is arrested and convicted for assault and sent to prison. Now, before this, because we sort of glossed over a certain area here of adolescence, you coined him as a convicted sex offender, and in 2000 he is convicted. But tell us if there is any, according to your research, any predilection, or if he is inclined towards some kind of a sexual offense before this 2000. Is there any indication what his aberrant sexual desires might be before he is actually arrested in 2000?
Yeah, one of the things about bipolar disorder, which I actually learned during the research of this book, is one of the manifestations is a pretty strong sexual appetite. And when he was with one of the girlfriends that I interviewed for the book, she told me that his nickname was Energizer Bunny because he, would just go and go and go. And I'm not trying to gross anybody out, but, he really did have an appetite for that. And she said it was ironic that he was actually very inclined to try to please her. And that's part of the reason why she had a hard time believing this, because she didn't see him as the kind of person who would ever rape someone, because that's not who he was to her. However, he did cheat on her, and he cheated on her. They broke up, and they got back together, and he cheated on her again. He later told his aunt that he had cheated on his girlfriend. I don't know that I believe this, but supposedly 80 times. So he definitely cheated. He seemed to have no boundaries, when it came to having a girlfriend and going and messing around on the side. When he had the second girlfriend, that's when this incident happened with his 13-year-old neighbor. Now, he, to this day, this is another thing that's ironic, he has, acknowledged and admitted to in court raping and killing 2 teenage girls, yet to this day he still denies molesting this 13-year-old neighbor, because I think somehow in his mind, if he can rationalize, that he was sent to prison for wrongly convicted the first time around, he wouldn't be where he is today, because this ruined his whole life. So he's got this whole victim pathology.
Right.
And so, he definitely had some problems here sexually. And he told me, he said, I hit her in the head. I wanted to kill her, but I stopped myself. And so he's willing to admit that to me, but he refused to admit that he stuck his hand down her pants and molested this 13-year-old girl. I said, well, so she ran across the street with her zipper down with one shoe. What about that? And he goes, well, that, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. So, twisted, kind of twisted.
Yeah. So
kind of leaves you speechless, huh?
Yeah. So there's no. So it looks like he has a normal heterosexual sex drive, and he's dealing with adults. At least that's what it looks like. And you say bipolar. He has this increased sexual appetite, or at least a very, very healthy sexual appetite. So when do more criminal? When does he have at least the first reported incident or brush with police? Tell us what age and what that incident might be.
Well, the first time he ran into police was when he was trespassing at the high school, when he went to see his girlfriend. He used to like to sing with the choir as well. Right. And so he came back, and the security guard told him, you can't be here. You don't go to school here anymore. And he just kept coming back. So that was his first brush with the police. And then this thing with the molestation and assault of his neighbor was the second thing, and it was in 2000.
In 2000. Now, he goes to prison in Corcoran, California State. Is it California State Prison?
No, that's where he is now.
No. Yeah, now. Pardon me.
Yeah,
he was
in a couple different prisons the first time because he had a mental breakdown, and this is one of the things that I learned during my research. His mother gave me access to his mental health records from prison, which I could not get actually from the prison system, even with a letter signed by Gardner to release it to me. But basically, he had a breakdown while he was in prison, basically threatening to kill the guards and the judge that put him there and everyone else who, because he was wrongly convicted, blah, blah, blah. So, that's pretty significant that he was not designated as a sexually violent predator when he was released. He was designated as a low-risk offender. While he was in prison, he was obviously dangerous. So that's one of the main things I want people to see that is wrong with our system here in California, the way these people are evaluated when they leave. They clearly screwed that up. Because if you're designated as a sexually violent predator, as he was, as I think he should have been, based on those threats, he would have been sent someplace else for treatment. And it's possible to just keep somebody there, indefinitely, but it costs $180,000 a year. So they don't just do that to anybody because it's too expensive. So these people are dangerous. They're getting released, and they're on the street. And, he wasn't medicated. So while he was not medicated, he would end up having, episodes like that where he would get violent. He would have no impulse control, and he would get very angry, and he couldn't control his anger.
But what if he were not to take his medication anyway, not liking the side effects, like you say, if he had actual physical detrimental effects?
Yeah, well, there was probably, I don't know what else. He had a really bad anger problem, and he always did. That was something that went back to when he was a teenager, I think.
Right. So, yeah, you say that he always had he was pretty vile, angry person right from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't know exactly when that started, but I know that he also had some paranoia issues, even when he was, very young, 9, 10, when he was initially hospitalized. They saw that as well. So, he had a whole mix of symptoms that are not exactly specific to being bipolar.
You talked about addiction and running in his family and for a couple of generations. What addiction did he have or have?
Right. So, in addition to not being medicated for his being bipolar, he also, great thing to do, was drinking alcohol to excess, and he was dating this woman who was a meth user. So he decided to try to start, see what that was like, and then he starts using that more and more often. And he admitted to me, "Why, that was not a good idea." No. Methamphetamine, even when you're not mentally ill, is a really dangerous drug. What it does to people, it makes people violent and act crazy. So when you're already, imbalanced like that, and you're drinking. He drank, 16 beers the night before he killed Amber. So, and he was, using drugs. It was just crazy amounts of stuff. He was really did everything to excess.
Now, what's interesting, too, for some people, I don't think everyone understands it, there's about parole. But tell us a little bit. He was sentenced in 2000, but he was paroled 5 years later. And you talk about some of the, of course, again, you have issues with, or at least you're reporting on, just the facts surrounding this. Basically, that there are strict parole conditions that parolees have to adhere to, and if they don't, they can violate that parole. So tell us how on earth he even got parole, and why they thought he would be, he'd be a good candidate for parole, and then what are some of the conditions that would be applied to John Gardner once he was released?
Well, he had a 5-year. I think he had he had a 5-year term, and he got out, so that's normal. But what I was saying before was, you're evaluated before you're released by a mental health professional and by the prison people, and basically there was a disagreement, that the corrections people said, he needed to be treated, and the mental health people said he didn't. Well, clearly there was a mix-up because he had that breakdown where he was threatening to kill people, and I think that was a major mistake on the state's part, and that's something where he should have been sent someplace else, but he wasn't. So he was designated a low-risk offender. So somebody who's threatened to kill people being designated as a low-risk offender to me is yet another problem. He was given a GPS bracelet to wear, but not until, a couple of years later. And so, he was he was cited and arrested for smoking marijuana so that, to me, probably, and people that I spoke with were wondering, well, why didn't he get violated for that? Well, he was arrested. Something happened. I tried calling the parole officer to get an answer from that. But, nobody wants to answer now that 2 girls are dead. Nobody wants to, be responsible for that.
Right.
So it was the choice, though, that somebody made, probably the parole officer, to not officially, quote unquote, violate him. So, and what I was told is, well, the prisons are crowded, and this was not a violent offense. This was not a rape. This had nothing to do with molesting any girls. And so, they're busy now freeing people from prison because they're overcrowded, and they're putting people back into the jails. So I'm sure it had to do with money and crowding,
sure.
and that wasn't the kind of thing that's just not what the parole officers are doing, right? They're trying to catch the more serious ones. The other problem was that he's got this bracelet on, but nobody's tracking him in real time because they don't track low-risk offenders in real time. And so people think that they're secure with these people running around with the bracelets, but in fact we're not, because nobody's watching them. Those are not used to stop crimes. They're used later to go, oh, guess we missed that, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then, he also went on to prison grounds, which is a felony for somebody who's a convicted felon to go onto prison grounds when they're not supposed to. So there were a number of times, that he could have been violated and sent back, and and he's also using all these drugs. And, he claims, well, I got a parole officer at one point who just ruined my life. I had this really good, high-paying job in L.A., which is 2 counties away, for $49 an hour because he was an electrician. And I had a girlfriend who was the mother of my, 2 small boys. And I lost my relationship. I couldn't go see her because the parole officer told me I had to quit this job because I couldn't work out of the county, which meant I couldn't go see my girlfriend, which also meant I couldn't afford to send her any money to pay for the, support for these boys, and lost his relationship. He had to move because he couldn't afford his apartment. He had to get a different job, which paid probably about a third of what he was making, and he ended up being homeless and living out of his truck. Now, in the defense of somebody like this, I'm not excusing it, I'm just trying to explain that you take somebody who's mentally unstable and you cause them to lose financial stability, any kind of home life, any kind of relationship. He's not allowed to live with his mother because his mother lives too close to a school. He's basically going to disintegrate and go out and attack somebody. That's another problem that I found in my reporting with the system that we have. Nobody wants to have these people live in their neighborhood, which I understand, but people need to also understand that if you make life too difficult for these people, they're going to come out and attack you. So it's not smart, and there's no such thing as, locking these people up and throwing away the key. That they don't want to pay for it, and they don't want to have them in their neighborhood. They don't want to deal with these people, and they don't want to deal with the problem, and so nothing's going to change unless people start paying attention to some of the things I revealed in this book. It made me angry to find all this stuff out.
Now, he eventually he's violated his parole for living with his girlfriend, but there is a report.
He wasn't living with his girlfriend. He was. What I was saying is he couldn't work out of town. He wasn't doing anything wrong or being violated. His parole officer just said, "You can't do this anymore." The other parole officer said he could, and then she said, "You can't do this anymore. You have to come and work in the county."
Now, where is this report where he was feeling out of control and likely to hurt someone? When did this happen?
Well, he was disintegrating because of all the stuff that I was just mentioning. So he lost his good job, he lost his home, he was homeless, he couldn't live anywhere, except out of his truck, and he was going back and forth. Finally, ended up staying with his grandmother, which was in Riverside County, which is one county north of where his mother lived. So he was kind of going back and forth between his grandmother's place and his mother's place. Now, he was registered at his grandmother, so that's where he was supposed to be living. And a lot of people thought, well, he was living at his mother's. Well, he wasn't living at his mother's, but he was, in fact, going back and forth, which is allowed under the law. But it's like driving through a loophole. It's not wrong, but it's not exactly what you're supposed to be doing under the spirit of the law. So forgot your question. I'm sorry. What was your?
Well, we talk about who he reported to, so this feeling out of control and likely to hurt someone.
Right. Okay, so he's going back and forth, and the reason he's going back and forth is because he's clearly disintegrating, and that's partly because he's using meth more often. When you use meth, you're going to start disintegrating anyway. So on top of all the other stuff with, not having money and not having a place to live that's stable, he was still, still using drugs, and his mother could tell that he was really out of control. He had pretty much totaled 2 cars by running into things on purpose, and then he basically said to his mom, I need help, and she said, yes, I think you do need help. So he started, trying to find a place to take him, some kind of treatment facility, and he thought he should get drug treatment first. She thought he should get mental health treatment. He said, I think I need to deal with the drugs first, and then the other stuff will follow. But regardless, he spent some time on the phone, and I couldn't really pin down exactly how many places he called, but she said she did sit there and watch him and listen to him do this at her place for at least a couple, 3 days, trying to get placed into one of these treatment facilities, and nobody would take him because he was a sex offender. And so there are no beds in the county here where we live in San Diego that will take a sex offender, no mental health treatment facility and no mental health treatment facility. Substance abuse or mental health. There's no place for him to go. And so they went to a public facility, a psychiatric outpatient place, and he saw a psychiatrist and said, hey, I think I might qualify as a 5150, which is someone who is deemed to be dangerous, and in danger of harming himself or others. And because he was not found to be ready to go hurt somebody right that second, the psychiatrist gave him some pills and sent him on his way. And about a week later, he went and then tried to kill himself by doing a fatal binge, near fatal binge of, again, meth and probably cocaine and some street drugs and a whole bunch of beer and trying to mix everything. He said he was actually trying to give himself a heart attack to kill himself, and it still didn't work. And then he ended up killing Chelsea, like 2 weeks after that. So after the psychiatric visit and after the suicide attempt, he's still not hospitalized. Several
forced to be
suicide
hospitalized.
attempts, right? Almost. Yeah. He ran into things with 2 cars and then did the drug binge. That's 3 suicide attempts, and he still wasn't able to be admitted anywhere.
Wow. Yeah, he should have qualified 3 times.
You'd think,
so. Yeah, that's incredible.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so. Okay, so that's his mental state, and that's who John Gardner is. Tell us about Chelsea.
Okay.
Please.
Chelsea King was 17 years old. She was blonde, blue-eyed, really pretty, very ambitious and bright, young, talented senior in high school. And when she grew up, she wanted to be an activist, and she was an environmentalist, and she was on the track team. She played in the junior, the youth symphony. She was, really popular. Everyone liked her, wanted to be her, were friends with her, and she was apparently, really popular and a likable person who everybody thought was going to go be something big someday.
Right.
And she went running one afternoon. It was a Thursday afternoon, and when she didn't come home at the time that she normally did, she's very reliable, very dependable, always kept a very certain schedule. Her parents knew something was wrong immediately, and they tracked her phone to her car, and her father drove over there and saw it in the parking lot of this community park, where it was right off this trail network, which is this very large area called the of course, now I'm going to forget it. This is the Rancho Bernardo Community Park, but it's attached to the San Diego River Valley. It's really big and beautiful, and it's right around a lake called Lake Hodges. And I went up there to kind of retrace her steps, and it was actually kind of eerie. It's a very big, open area. There are trails that approach from different sides, and there's houses that are around it, but it's actually just a huge open area with water and trails and trees and bushes. So there's some areas where, the houses are pretty far up and away, so basically she went out running, and he grabbed her. So
this was February 2000 and this is
February 2010, right?
2010, right?
And this is a year after Amber Dubois went missing.
Right.
So
tell us, follow up on the Chelsea King. What happens next?
Okay. Well, we're kind of skipping over Amber. Amber came first. Do you want me to go back? Because they kind of come together. So why don't
let's do that.
Amber.
Yeah,
Amber Dubois was a 14-year-old who lived about 8 miles away from this park in another city called Escondido. So these are all really kind of close to each other. Chelsea was from a small town called Poway, but she was running in Rancho Bernardo at this park. So these are all sort of in the same general area. So Amber was walking to school one morning. This was a year before, in February of 2009. And she was a bookworm, and she loved animals. She had a real affinity with wolves. And she was wearing dark clothing this one morning, and it was kind of a little bit sprinkly. And she was walking to school by herself, and for some reason she decided to take a different route to school. According to John Gardner, where he said he grabbed her, this is all we know, she normally walked a different way, and what threw the police off is that there were two parents who were absolutely positive that they saw her right near the high school walking with her hood up, laying one of those hoodies. And so she was she had a $200 check in her pocket. She was on her way to go buy this lamb for the Future Farmers of America project that she was enrolled in, and she was really excited about getting this lamb. And then she never showed up at school. So when her parents said, "Oh gosh, she should have been home. Where is she?" They called the police right away, and the difference between these two cases is that there was no last known point for her. So Chelsea had a car that they could trace, and they could see her cell phone was in there. They came and opened it, and they could see that she had changed clothes and had gone running. And so that's kind of what they figured. She must have been running around somewhere on those trails, and that's when they went looking for her. With Amber, there were these sightings by these two parents, but they didn't know for sure. So they spent time looking around and searching around the high school for her, and they couldn't find her. And they had dogs they brought in, and they couldn't find her. And there were some other sightings of her, they thought, somewhere in the general area. They used a pretty narrow perimeter of searching through the sex offenders who lived right around the school. And as it turned out, John Gardner was just outside that perimeter. He lived in Escondido, too, about 2 miles from the school, but they didn't search wide enough. And so, looking back, 20/20 hindsight, if they had just expanded their perimeter a little bit more around the school, they probably would have at least interviewed him. But he completely got away with it. And he just started drinking more and more and was using the meth more after that happened. And so, the two girls went missing almost a year apart. So clearly, and when he did that fatal drug binge, it was on the year anniversary. So clearly it was, he was dealing with the aftermath of killing that girl. So the difference between these two incidents, though, what he told me was in the first case, he was very angry at his girlfriend at the time because she was doing meth with these other guys, and they were supposed to get together, and she didn't want to. She wanted to hang out with these friends. And so he just sat there up all night drinking beer, getting more and more angry, and he went out in the morning with a gun and a knife in the car, and he was driving around just looking for somebody that he was going to hurt. And he wasn't sure whether he was going to kill somebody or not, or whether he was going to use the gun or the knife, but that he was going to use one of them. And he saw her walking to school alone down a street that was fenced in on both sides and knew that she wasn't going to have anywhere to run. So he pulled up and told her to get in the car. And then he, threatened her and said, get in the car. And so she did. So that was Amber. And then with Chelsea, he had been hanging around that park all day, again, drinking and talking to women, and then he saw one he wanted, and he said, I want to have sex, to himself. He thought, there was just a sudden impulse, I want to have sex. And so he ran after a different woman, and he couldn't catch up to her. And so he saw Chelsea, and he saw her come back again because it's a loop. And he grabbed her when she came back around because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he wanted to have sex, and it was just like that, boom. It was just so sad that she was just happened to be there.
How did he kill them?
He raped and stabbed Amber, and he raped and strangled Chelsea, and that's all I'm going to say.
Right. Well, that's enough.
Yeah, that's enough. That's what he admitted to in the plea bargain. So.
Right.
I just want to point out that I made a specific effort to be really sensitive to, in case the parents ever read it, and also for anybody else who is reading this book, I don't think we really needed to know how he killed these girls because they were so young and they're minors. And, normally when I write a book like this, they're adults, and I try to keep it as technical as I can. If I ever describe that, it's usually more about the autopsy or what have you, because I always feel like, just out of respect to the victims' families, that we don't really need to be gross and gruesome, and so I purposely did not go into those details.
Well, there are times when the gruesome details need to be told as well. I got to say that too. So, and you can never really, and sometimes you can never please victims' families, no matter what. And I can understand that. I can totally understand that. So, now, how did police glean that John Gardner was involved with Chelsea King? What way did they discover the connection?
Well, this was a pretty unusual case in how quickly they responded. This case was actually just really unique here in San Diego. I've never seen any case like it, which is the reason why I decided this really needed a book-length book. Excuse me. Amber's parents were really, they were on TV. They talked to the media. They went on national TV. There was a story in People magazine. She was missing. She was actually on the cover of People magazine at one point, but they couldn't find her. And so when Chelsea went missing, the thing that I mentioned was different about being the car in the parking lot. They immediately called out the search team and had them going out into that park. And the interesting thing about this was there were flyers that went out everywhere. There was suddenly, a page set up, Chelsea's light. Chelsea's Gone Missing, I think, was probably the very early, I don't remember exactly what it was called, but there was a search that went viral on Facebook. And it went national and it went international, and everybody was looking for Chelsea King. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. It just was astounding, and it was, unprecedented here in San Diego that they were searching for her. They didn't know where she was. They hadn't found anything, but they just kind of figured, well, this looks like foul play, right? They just kind of figured that right away. With Amber, they thought, oh, well, she's a runaway. So they didn't go all out in the same way. And so by having everybody out searching for her, there was a guy who lived in the neighborhood over on the other side of the park, and just keep in mind this is a huge, huge, expansive area. So there was a ridge overlooking the other way on the other side of the park, and he actually found a pair of her underwear, which, they didn't know it was her underwear, but they found it right off the path, where if you go into the neighborhood near where his mom lived, there was this pair of underwear. So he happened to be, I think he was a retired law enforcement guy. So he had called the police. The police came and picked it up, and they ran that pair of panties through the testing process over the weekend and got a very fast result. Because he had been in prison for that other molestation assault, his DNA was in the database, and so they got a match between his DNA, there was some semen on there, and some of her blood on the underwear. So they were able to arrest him. She was disappeared on Thursday. They arrested him on Sunday, and they hadn't even found her body yet, but they arrested him, and they found her a couple days later. And then, 4 days after that, based on a tip, that's that's all the authorities would say, authorities were led to the remains of Amber Dubois. So I immediately was wondering, was that Gardner? And for 6 weeks,
Sure.
nobody would say anything. And then I thought, well, I guess it wasn't him because they would have said so. But it turned out it was him, and that's the whole time that they were trying to link him to the murder, because he took them to the remains on a deal that they couldn't use use that trip against him. They had to find independent evidence linking him to the murder.
Right. And rather than ask you later, then I'll ask you sooner. Why do you think John Gardner led police? Because we know he's not a nice guy, so, well,
okay,
maybe
so
you can tell us.
Let me explain something about John Gardner. John Gardner really does have two sides to him, okay? And he really, that's why his family couldn't believe that he was capable of this. He really, I don't know whether he felt remorse or not. He told me he felt regret, and there is a difference, but he's claimed that he did not see the difference in the definition of the two words. And I don't know if he's playing word games with me or if he just really didn't know. It's not for me to judge, but he basically wanted to tell authorities where she was because he felt like it was going to make him look like somehow better in the eyes of the community, that he helped her family get closure. But honestly, more importantly than that, he got a deal. His attorney said, hey, can you tell us where Chelsea King is? And the police said, can you tell us where Chelsea King is? And he wouldn't. And so his lawyers said, well, okay, they found Chelsea's body. It's too late now for you to tell us where Chelsea is, but did you have anything to do with Amber? And after some prodding, he finally acknowledged that he did. And he said, and I can tell you where her body is, but you're not going to be able to find her. I'm going to have to take you there. So they made a deal and, had this whole covert operation to sneak him out of the jail where, hopefully no one could see him, because this was just such an enormous media case. And then he led the authorities up there. It took him a while to find where she was, where he had buried her remains.
Is there any possibility that he enjoyed reliving the experience to some degree in leading authorities to the body?
Well, they thought, they weren't sure what he was doing. They weren't sure if he was just trying to get out, if he wanted some free cigarettes because you're not allowed to smoke in the jail. Did he just want to go have, a jaunt outside? Was he going to try to escape? I mean, they honestly didn't know what he was doing. But I think he liked the attention, and I mean, at the very least.
Yeah.
He told me he actually didn't really like thinking about it. So I'm not sure that he wanted to relive it, to be honest. I mean, I know what you're saying because I know some killers are like that.
Yeah.
But when we talked about it, he said he liked the raping part. He didn't like the killing part.
And why did he say he did kill them if he didn't enjoy the killing? Because again, some of these guys really enjoy that aspect of it.
Right.
He enjoyed the raping, but felt they had to die?
Well, with Chelsea, he told me he killed her because he didn't want her to tell. And I guess he had told me that he wasn't necessarily going to kill her, but she kept talking to him, during this whole thing. And I guess he said she was acting like a little psychologist, and that annoyed him. And he just knew that she was going to tell, and there was nothing he could do about that, so he had to kill her. So I don't think he was, according to what he told me, I mean, who knows if he's telling me the truth, but what he said was he wasn't necessarily wanting to kill Chelsea, but with Amber he was very angry and wanted to hurt somebody and wanted to hurt them bad. So he wasn't necessarily intending to kill someone, but he definitely wanted to hurt somebody. So I think with Amber he probably, he thought he was going to enjoy it, I think is what he said. And then he said he didn't. And I don't know if he's just telling me that because he thinks that sounds better. Because he does tend to tell people things that he thinks they want to hear. So he would tell the detectives one thing, he would tell Amber's mother something, he would tell probably me something, and he would probably tell the, detective something else. That's kind of how he works.
Now, you had a 5-hour interview. Tell us, I mean, you're talking about some of the contents of questioning him, but tell us a little bit about the whole experience itself.
Okay.
Take us back there. I thought that was a very interesting aspect of the book.
Thank you. Well, I waited until the end of my research to do this. I mean, I had been corresponding with him a little bit by letter. He knew that I had been interviewing his mother and family members and girlfriends because his mom was continuing to visit him every couple of weeks, and I'm sure she kind of filled him in on what we were talking about. And he wanted to make sure he had his mom's approval for me to go ahead and do this book. So I think he kind of knew what I'd been doing, and I'd been sending him letters, which were basically waivers so that we could get documents released so I could really tell this story. So I have to say, he really did cooperate with this, and also, I didn't pay him or his family or anything, but he really did want this story told, fully, because he told me he really did want to see if things could be changed, that, he knew that he was where he belonged and that if he were out, he would just keep doing this, and so he needed to be where he was, and he knew that. And so, anyway, all that aside, I was still scared to go to talk to him because in court, during the sentencing, the victim's parents got up there and, blasted him as they normally do, and blasted his mother. And there was one other victim who we haven't talked about, who was a 22-year-old college graduate student who was running, and he grabbed her too and said he wanted her money. And she thought he was going to rape her, but since he didn't actually touch her, tried to touch her, grab her, genitals or whatever, the police did not categorize it as a rape, but she definitely felt that that's what he was wanting to do. But she had experience in martial arts, and so she was able to pivot and smack him in the nose with her elbow and get away. And so while she was speaking during the sentencing hearing, she mentioned, how is your nose? And you could just see his face erupt into this almost cartoon-like, bizarre, grimace. And he snarled, like all of a sudden, and with anger. He was so angry that she had said this because it was humiliating for him to have some girl claim that, she basically got away by getting him in the nose, right? So we all saw that immediate anger flash, and so that's what I had in my head, and I thought, oh God, what if I say the wrong thing? And he grabs me across the table and lunges for my neck because there was no glass. This is a segregated unit, but it's not death row. These are the mentally unstable people that they can't put in the mainstream population. So Charles Manson is in the same unit, and Philip Dorito, the guy who took J.C. Dugard, they're all in the same unit. So there's no glass there. He shook my hand. We sat across the table from each other. I was like 6 feet away. So I didn't sleep the night before, and it was, but once I got there, he was actually very charming. He shook my hand, very friendly, and if I hadn't known what he was capable of, I wouldn't have known just from talking to him. So we talked about, mostly what I wanted to do was focus on the psychological aspects of what he was doing and why. And he told me he didn't want to talk about how he killed these girls, and I didn't really want to hear that anyway, so I didn't ask. And he did end up volunteering some stuff that I didn't ask for. And so, but largely I thought, normally the way an interview goes, you start out with easy stuff and you kind of work up to the more, difficult things to talk about, and it was kind of the other way around. He was perfectly happy to talk about everything right away. So I just, I asked questions and just listened most of the time. And when I do an interview like that, I tell my students, I teach journalism, I teach narrative nonfiction. They're like, well, do you confront these people? Do you tell them they're lying to you? I'm like, well, not really, because you want them to keep talking. You don't want to challenge them because that doesn't really do anybody any good. They're going to stop talking. You're not going to get your information. So I just sort of, sometimes I do devil's advocate, or I'll, if I notice that they're saying something that is definitely not true, I'll say, oh, well, but the detective says that you said this, but now you're saying this, why is that? So, basically we talked about why he picked Chelsea and why he picked Amber and what was going on in his mind. And I said, were these people to you, or were they more like objects? And he says, no, they were people. And I said, huh. And I just kind of was just asking questions, and I tried not to let any kind of judgment, get onto my face, and because I wanted him to just feel like he could just talk,
What did he do? What I'm interested in, what he had to say in that prison interview about that year after he first murdered. What was going through his mind? How did he deal with that? Why did he repeat it, and then why did he wait so long to repeat it? Those are some of the questions that were on my mind. What do you have to say about that?
I don't really know if I can answer those questions. I could see that he was clearly, I don't know what word to use. I don't want to say guilty because I don't know if he felt guilty, but he was clearly troubled by it because he tried to kill himself, and but at the same time he didn't want to turn himself in. He didn't want to tell anybody, and he wouldn't have if he hadn't been caught. But he told his mother, well, I dropped those panties on purpose so I could get caught. But he didn't tell the detectives that. He told the detectives that they were lying to him when they said they had the panties because he didn't believe them. So what happened was, he had picked up Chelsea's clothes and put it made a bowl out of his T-shirt and put the clothes and the shoes, and he was going to dump them all down into the storm drain. And he dropped those panties on his way out. It fell out. So, I don't know that guilt is the right word for how he felt, but he clearly was a troubled person. He was angry. That's what he said. He was very angry. He was using drugs, and he didn't really have any kind of direction. He was a messed up guy. So, to be honest, I can't really tell you definitively what he was doing or thinking, but he was, he had no direction. He didn't have a job, or if he did, he wasn't earning much, and I think he was unemployed at the time, as a matter of fact. And like I said, he totaled 2 cars and tried to, drug himself and drink himself to death, and I think he was a pretty, angry and unhappy person and was trying to get help.
Now let's get into some of the insights that you've learned from this. I mean, we talked about a few obvious things, that if somebody's asking for treatment and can't get into any treatment center, no matter how hard they try, because they're a known sex offender and because of budgetary concerns. Tell us in total, what are some of the things that you have learned from this case, if there is any kind of good that can come from this, that some of those insights that you've seen that may be of benefit to someone looking at this kind of individual again, or this kind of case again, how it can be possibly helpful. Tell us what you did learn. What are some of those insights that you did gain?
Well, I pretty much shared the major ones already throughout the interview today, but I can kind of go over them again. The substance abuse, mental health bed issue, where there are none available to sex offenders. That's number one. Number two, and I'm hoping that some of this will be cleared up by Chelsea's Law, which was passed. Right. Although it seems that the person, the main sponsor of that bill checked into this, and it seems like maybe this still isn't fixed. But the problem with the evaluation, there apparently now is supposed to be a third person to come in and break a tie, like there was in his case, but there's one mental health person saying, he should be let out and he's fine, and the other one saying, no, he isn't. There's now a third person to break the tie. Okay. I hope that works. I don't know whether it will. There's also, as part of that law, something called the containment model, which is a way of monitoring these people once they're out, which is more intensive, and there are more people who are available as resources. However, to me, I don't know that that's going to be properly funded. California has a lot of problems with its budget, and the Chelsea's Law also would keep some of these people in jail and prison longer and on parole longer, which costs money. And I don't know how much money there's going to be left for funding this, this monitoring. And frankly, the people who would need to be hired to do the monitoring, and all that costs money. And in order to make this model work, there's, software and various stuff that it's kind of complicated. But there's just a lot of things that cost money that I'm not sure are going to be funded properly. And even though the governor says, oh, yes, it will, the budget is a mess. So there's that. And then there's also something that I pointed out in the book, that the Sex Offender Management Board is a statewide group that has, looked at studies which shows kind of what I was talking about before, that if you have these people in places in situations where they're unstable and they don't have a good place to live, they are not in a steady job, their lives are, and emotionally they start disintegrating, they are going to reoffend. And people need to get that through their head. And what these studies have shown is that, all of this money that's being spent and these laws that are being passed to restrict where they live are not effective. What they should be doing is restrict where they go, during the day. So, for example, so what if they live near a school? If they can't go to the school, then it doesn't matter. But just because they live near a school doesn't mean they're going to go to the school. He went to that park, and that's where he killed Chelsea. So, it's more effective to restrict a park from a sex offender than it is to restrict someone from living in a certain place. You see what I'm saying? So those recommendations were ignored when they put Chelsea's law together. And they've consistently ignored these studies in putting any kinds of laws together. So I think people need to look more closely at the studies that have been done at these people, because people don't want to spend money on locking them up anyway, but that's what most people want to do. They don't want to think about sexual offenders. And frankly, I didn't want to either. I thought this was an opportunity when this case broke to really take a look at an area that most people don't want to think about, and they don't want to think about it. It's repulsive, and frankly, it is to me too. I don't understand how a grown man can go and rape and kill a teenager or a young girl. I mean, I can't even begin to understand that. But that's what I was attempting to do, is at least show you the kind of person who does do this kind of thing and what's going through their mind, so that there's a bunch of red flags hopefully that pop up, so that if your daughter starts dating somebody like John Gardner, if you've read my book, maybe you'll look more closely and be able to protect them. So.
What I found interesting too is it's not really a debate, and again, it's not maybe an answerable question. Mm-hmm. But you see molestation, you see acceleration. Or an escalation, of crimes, and then you see rape and murder. Again, you can't prosecute, you can't imprison somebody for the likelihood of what they may do or may not do. But it seems interesting that, he's got drug abuse, he's got mental issues, but that graduation to murder I still have an issue with. I understand mental illness.
Right.
At least I think I can comprehend mental illness to great degrees of a lot of the, schizophrenia or what was considered schizophrenia. But I still think that just like the bus beheader on the Greyhound bus, I think definitely that person's schizophrenic or mentally ill, whatever mental illness designation you like to give him. But he's also a killer who happens to be schizophrenic, because the vast majority of mentally ill people do not graduate to that, the most heinous transgression in humanity, taking of another person's life, and then this person killed again.
Right. Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I am not trying to sympathize with Gardner, but what he was saying, and I think that this has some validity. As his life disintegrated, as things got harder and harder for him, so as it became harder for him to cope, he got more and more angry, and he disintegrated. He used drugs more. He became more unstable, and then he became more violent. You see what I mean? So I think you do have to look at that, and I do think that as a society we can deal with some of those issues. And some of these people can't be rehabilitated, and they're going to do this anyway, and they're just broken, and and that's just how it is. But I think, what they were saying about him, his family, was that he wasn't this kind of person, and he changed once he was in prison. Now, granted, he admitted to punching that girl in the head, and so, maybe he was just moving down this road anyway. Who knows?
Right.
We can't really say. But it does seem that, there were places where he did try to stop, and he did try to get help, and he at least maybe could have been stopped from killing Chelsea. And if the system had been better equipped, that he could have had his parole violated and gone back in prison, which would have cost money, taxpayer money. But the one thing I did did want to mention on some of the issues you just raised, this containment model that I was talking about with the monitoring that they're supposedly stepping up. There is some kind of metric that they're supposed to be applying where they're going to be looking at some of those things, the drug use and, the thoughts that he's having. And if he's able to talk to somebody about these things, it's possible. What I was told is, we can't stop them from wanting to do these things, but if we give them the tools to deal with what to do when they have these thoughts, maybe they won't act on them. And but he needs to be talking to somebody, and as part of this monitoring, that's hopefully what's going to be happening. But what he was telling me is, well, why would I tell anybody anything? Because if I start telling them that I have done anything, they're just going to lock me up again, and I don't want to get locked up again. So the idea is that, you need to talk to somebody before you do something if you have an urge, so that this professional can help you deal with those feelings, hopefully, and get you to stop. I mean, that's ideally what would be the best scenario if we can get that to happen.
Well, we'll have good luck with that, because this takes so much
I'm being optimistic.
Yeah, that takes a lot of manpower, and not a lot of public sympathy goes towards as soon as you suggest something like that. I know what you're saying, though. He did ask at a crucial time for help, and he was denied. And I mean,
well, let me just insert something. I'm not trying to be sympathetic. What I'm trying to say is if he doesn't get help, it's not to help him, it's to protect us from him.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
So
we got to look at the bigger picture, and I think definitely talking about this and writing about this, you've done a service to the community as well. And I think people have to realize that even though this is a dark chapter, it is history, and it is current events, and they're important stories. And this really illustrates that this is an important story, and that it's just the societal impact that this case has on everyone. And still, to this day, it will continue and reverberate. And hopefully some good can come out of it incrementally. I mean, obviously things move very slow. Yeah. But also the interview with John Gardner, I think it's very important, rather than put these people to death or lock them up and forget about them, is that we interview them and re-interview and try to glean some kind of sense. I mean, that's the way they created profiling in the very first place, which can help law enforcement as a tool to predict or to arrest and to understand. So I think what we need now is that as these killers evolve, and some of these people are very forthcoming, they would like to be able to speak because that's their whole narcissistic bent, where they would like to speak about it. I think we can learn a lot, and I think that should be our responsibility, to try to learn something of some benefit to try to help prevent this at some point.
The problem is that there are people who, and the victims' families, for example, they feel that this is their story to tell, or they just don't want him to be able to talk about it because they feel like, it's giving him a platform to brag. And I agree with what you're saying. No, that's not the idea. The idea is for us to learn from this so that we can try to prevent it from happening again. This is not to sympathize with him. Yes, he did try to get help, and yes, he should have gotten help. And if he had gotten help, maybe these girls wouldn't have been killed. That's the point.
We're not trying to let him out, and we don't want him out. We want some kind of prevention rather than seeing this happen over. And you and I know better than maybe even the fans that are listening right now that this happens over and over and over again, and we don't seem to be learning any lessons. So maybe it's time that we looked at it differently. And again, with sex offenders too, it seems that we can look at serial killers and try to understand their personalities and humanize them. But really, sex offenders, it seems collectively we don't want to know the extent.
Exactly.
We don't want to know.
And that's exactly why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, you've done a great job, and thank you very much for coming on and discussing Lost Girls, your latest by Caitlin Rother. Tell us, Caitlin, you have an excellent website and a big platform. So tell us how people can get in contact with you and find out more about all the true crime books and fiction books that you have written or co-authored.
Okay. My website's CaitlinRother.com, CaitlinRother.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. This is my 8th book. I'm now working on my 9th book on the Nanette Packard, Eric Naposky murder of multimillionaire inventor Bill McLaughlin, which will be out as soon as I finish it. Hoping to get it out sooner rather than later. I have, with Kensington Pinnacle, I'm just hoping that we can maybe move it out, so it should be out, I hope, by the next year. So
Great.
That's what I'm working on today, as a matter of fact.
Well, sounds good. We'll be looking forward to hearing about it in the new year, no doubt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
If we can. Okay, well, thank you very much, Caitlin. You have a great evening, and thank you once again for coming on and talking about your latest Lost Girls. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.